Chapter 1. Loomings. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long precisely, having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating my circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whatever it is, damp, drizzly November in my soul. Whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand on me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off. Then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon the sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, sometime or another, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. They're now in your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves and Indian tribes by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mole is washed by waves and cooled by breezes, which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water gazers there. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. Go from Corlear's Hook to Sotish Slip, and from thence by Whitehall northward. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reveries. Some leaning against the spiles, some seated upon the pier heads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging as if striving to get a still better seaward peep. But these are all landsmen of weekdays pent up in lath and plaster, tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How this then? Are the green fields gone? What do they hear? But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water, and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange, nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No, they must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues, inlanders all. They come from the lanes and the alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does this magnetic virtue of the needles of the compass of all ships attract them thither? Once more, say you in the contrary, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a dale, and leaves you there by a pool and a stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged into his deepest reveries. Stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment if your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor. Yes, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. But here is an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in the valley of the Saco. What is the chief element he employs? There stand his trees, each with a hollow trunk, as if hermit and crucifix were within. And here sleeps his meadow, and there sleeps his cattle, and up yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep in distant woodlands winds winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. But though the picture lies thus traced, and though this pine tree shakes down its sighs like leaves upon the shepherd's head, yet all were in vain unless the shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee-deep amongst the tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water. There's not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel your 1,000 miles to see it? Why did the poor poet of Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving 2 handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or to invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him at some time or another crazy to go to sea? Why, upon your first voyage as a passenger, did you feel yourself such a mystical vibration when you first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land? Why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity and own brother of Jove? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper, the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting, mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes and begin to overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep at nights, do not enjoy themselves much as a general thing. No, I never go as a passenger, nor, though I am something of a salt, do I ever go to sea as a commodore or a captain or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. It is quite as much as I do to take care of myself without taking care of the ships, barks, brigs, schooners, and what not. And as for going as cook, though I confess there is considerable glory in that, a cook being a sort of officer on shipboard, yet somehow I never fancied broiling fowls. Though once broiled, judiciously buttered, and judgmentally salted and peppered, there is no one who will speak more respectfully, not to say reverentially, of a broiled fowl than I will. It is out of the idolatrous dotings of the old Egyptians upon broiled ibis and roasted river horse that you see the mummies of these creatures in their huge bakehouses, the pyramids. No, when I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down into the forecastle, aloft there to the royal masthead. True, they rather order me about some and make me jump from spar to spar like a grasshopper in May meadow. And at first this sort of thing is unpleasant enough. It touches one's sense of honor, particularly if you come of an old established family in the land. Then Van Rensselaers or Randolphs or Hardicanutes. And more than that, if previous to putting your hand into the tar pot you have been lording it as a country schoolmaster, making the tallest boy stand in all of you, the transition is a keen one, I assure you, from a schoolmaster to a sailor, and requires a strong decoration of Seneca and the Stoics to enable you to grin and bear it. But even in this wears off in time. What of it? If some old hunks of sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down the decks, what does the indignity amount to, weighed, I mean, in the scales of the New Testament? Do you think the Archangel Gabriel thinks anything less of me because I promptly and respectfully obeyed that old husks in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Well then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everyone else is one way or the other served in much the same way, either in a physical or a metaphysical point of view. That is, so the universal thump is passed around, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I have ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay, and there is all the difference in the world between paying and being paid. The act of paying is perhaps the most uncomfortable infliction of the two orchard thieves being entailed upon us. But being paid, what will compare to that? The urbane activity which a man receives money is really marvelous, considering that we earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. Finally, I always go to sea as a sailor, because the wholesome exercise and pure air of the forecastle deck. For in this world, headwinds are far more prevalent than winds from astern. That is, if you never violate the Pythagorean maxim. So, for the most part, the Commodore on the quarter-deck gets his atmosphere at second hand from the sailors in the forecastle. He thinks he breathes it first, but not so. In much the same way do the commonality lead their leaders in many other things. At the same time, the leaders little suspect it. But wherefore it was that after having repeatedly smelt the sea as a merchant sailor, I should now take it into my head to go on a whaling voyage. This, the invisible police officer of the fates, who has the constant surveillance of me and secretly dogs me, and influences me in some unaccountable way. He can better answer than anyone else. And doubtless, my going on this whaling voyage, formed in part by the grand program of Providence that was drawn up a long time ago. It came in a sort of brief interlude in a solo between more extensive performances. I take that as this part of the bill that must have run something like this. Grand contested election for the presidency of the United States. Whaling voyage by one Ishmael. Bloody battle in Afghanistan. Well, I cannot tell why it was exactly those stage managers, the fates, put me down for this shabby part of a whaling voyage, when others were set down for magnificent parts in high tragedies, and short and easy parts in genteel comedies, and jolly parts in farces. Well, I cannot tell why this was exactly, yet, now that I recall all the circumstances, I think I can see a little into the springs and motives, which, being cunningly presented to me under various disguises, induced me to set upon performing the part I did, besides cajoling me into the delusion that it was a choice resulting from my own unbiased free will and discriminating judgment. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster roused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bulk, the undeliverable nameless perils of the whale. These, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps, such things would not have been inducements. But as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it. Would they let me, since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of a place one lodges in. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome. The great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and wild conceits that swayed to me in my purpose. Two and two there floated in my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and, mid most of them, one grand hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air. This is the end of chapter 1. So, you're introduced to Ishmael, the narrator, and he mentioned that he had been a schoolmaster. And he starts out saying that occasionally he feels the urge to go to sea. But a lot of the terms and a lot of the things that he used show that he's depressed, that he's a really sad individual deep down, and that instead of taking some terrible drastic action, he decides that he is going to have a change of scenery and goes to the ocean, which he views as life-giving and life-affirming. And let me tell you, like Ishmael, I have the urge to go to the ocean. I'm one of those people who will be just standing on the shore watching the water, or standing in the water watching deeper. And I try to get away to the ocean at least once a year. I sometimes don't make it. Sometimes I go 2-3 times. So far this year, I've been to both the Atlantic and the Pacific, which was wonderful. I've been to 3 of the 4 world's oceans. They've recently named a 5th around Antarctica, but I'm not sure I'd call that because it's sort of bound, sort of not bound. Anyway, been in 3 of the 4 world's oceans, and one of these days I'll pick up the 4th. But anyway, I feel the need to go to the water, and the water, the waves crashing, is just sort of life-affirming, and the smell of the air. There's a smell of the sea, which is the salt and the things growing in the water, and somewhat the things dying in the water, because the sea is just constantly churning. And because it's constantly churning and constantly changing, you have this turnover of little things growing and little things becoming bigger things, and sometimes they get eaten and sometimes they don't, and whatever. So I mean, you're to take a look at crabs, a crab lays 1,000 eggs, and maybe 3 of them become grown-up crabs, if they're lucky. 10. And a lot of things in the sea are like that, where you have fish, they lay thousands and thousands of eggs. Corals lay thousands and thousands of eggs. Plankton are just small floating things. So algae, just like algae just grows and grows and grows and grows like yeast. I mean, it just, one algae grows and spreads into 2, and 2 spread into 4, and 4 spread into 8, and just like grows and grows and grows. But in the sea, everything is constantly eating and being eaten, and it's just sort of this magical place of turnover and chaos and growth. Now, this is kind of contrasted because Ishmael said that the fates drove him there and that Providence drove him there. Now, Providence is a word that was used in the 1500s to 1900s, meaning the hand of God. It's Providence that said this, that made this happen. So it's like, this is the hand of God reaching down and making things happen. That's the name for the capital of Rhode Island, Providence. It's also the name, it's sort of the name of the town at the end of the hook, Cape Cod. Thank you, Lolly. Providence Town is the name at the end of Cape Cod, where the Provincetown. Okay. Provincetown is the name at the end of Cape Cod, where the Pilgrims first came ashore. And it's like, God has given us this land. This is Providence. So Ishmael is saying that he thought this was his choice, but because he's telling these things after the fact, it's like, no, this was the hand of fate. And he gave examples of contested elections and war in Afghanistan. Now, there is always war in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is always being invaded unsuccessfully. The Mongols sort of did it, but the Mongols never really held territory. They just took it. Alexander the Great had problems in Afghanistan. England couldn't hold it. Russia couldn't hold it. The United States couldn't hold it. And it's one of those places that you go and you take it, and then you just like get tired of fighting the people who don't realize they've lost. Anyway, so he's comparing his going to sea to fighting an unwinnable war and having the unwinnable war handed to him. So Ishmael is taking his depression, and as I said, he was seriously depressed. I mean, he was following funerals and standing around at coffin stores. So it's like, okay, I can't take land anymore. I gotta get to sea. And he made up his mind he's going to go to sea as a whaler.